And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Let's take a look now at your marine weather outlook for the state of Alaska. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Sunday, September 17th. And looking at the weather map for later this Sunday night into early Monday morning, we have a weakening area of low pressure. Northeastern Gulf coming on shore near or just north of Sitka with a weakening occluded front. Earlier, this system had produced widespread gale and even some storm force winds, but things will be improving. We have another low that'll be lifting out of the North Pacific and riding up back into the Gulf, but not quite as strong as the most recent low. Weak low pressure will sit over the northwestern part of the state, just outside of Kotzebue Sound near Kivalina, and then another low approaching the central bearing will gradually work its way east-southeastward and approach Bristol Bay by the time we get into Tuesday afternoon. So by Monday afternoon, we have that next low moving up into the central Gulf, but the central pressure is not as low as the one that occurred earlier this weekend. At 992 millibars, still weak area of low pressure lagging here across the northwest, and then the low in the central bearing works its way eastward. And we could see secondary development of another low there in the North Pacific on the south side of the Alaska Peninsula and southwest of Kodiak Island by Tuesday afternoon. So the marine forecast for Monday, winds coming down across the panhandle, south winds, though still 20 knots, some gusts to 35 knots there in Stevens Passage, waves running 4 feet or so, but Dixon Entrance, 7-foot waves, and then for the nearshore waters of the outer coast, winds will be westerly 25 knots south of Sitka with waves around 20 feet. Sitka up through Gustavus, we're looking at 15 knots with waves around 15 feet or so, and then a mixed bag of winds turning back easterly there west of Yakutat toward Cape Suckling with 10 to 12-foot waves. On Tuesday, winds will generally be northwest to north, 10 to 15 knots, inner channels with waves 2 feet Lynn Canal, 3 feet Stevens Passage, maybe upwards of 4 feet there south of Ketchikan and Metlakatla. Outer coast, northwest winds 15 knots, waves running generally 12 to 14 feet, though a bit less near 10 feet outside of Yakutat Bay. Across the northwestern Gulf, winds will also be coming down, though still some gale force gusts possible there outside of Cook Inlet, northeast of Kodiak City, northwest to west winds 30 to 35 knots, but variable winds off the Kenai coast, east winds 10 knots there within Prince William Sound with 2-foot waves, and then upper and middle Cook Inlet, north winds 15 knots, waves a few feet. And by Tuesday, variable winds 10 knots within Prince William Sound and off the Kenai coast, waves a couple of feet within Prince William Sound, kind of a southwest going more southeasterly wind 20 knots there at the entrance of Cook Inlet with waves 4 or 5 feet. And look for northeast winds, upper and middle Cook Inlet at 10 knots and waves running a couple of feet. Across Kodiak Island and east of Chiknik on Monday, winds will be west-northwest 25 to 30 knots, waves 5 to 7 feet. Winds become more westerly, down around 20 knots once you get further down along the length of the Alaska Peninsula, waves 5 to 6 feet on the North Pacific side and 4 to 5 feet on the Bering side, extending up into Bristol Bay, where winds will be northwesterly there at 20 knots. And then on Tuesday, south winds around 20 knots surrounding and south of Kodiak Island, waves 3 to 5 feet. Those winds will become more southeasterly 20 knots, middle and lower portions of the Alaska Peninsula, and waves 4 to 6 feet on the North Pacific side and 4 or 5 feet on the Bering side. For the eastern Aleutians, look for south-southwest winds 20 to 25 knots. More southwesterly once you get toward west of Nikolsky at 25 knots, and then shifting west-northwest 30 knots west of Kiska, waves generally 5 to 8 feet on the North Pacific, or I should say on the Bering side, and right around 7, 8 feet on the North Pacific side. The waves west of Adak will generally be around 10 to 12 feet. And then for Tuesday, southwest to west winds, eastern Aleutians at 20 knots, shifting northwest and increasing to 35-knot gales west of Adak. Waves will be 4 to 6 feet in the eastern Aleutians, and then once you get west of Adak, look for waves on the order of 13 to 17 feet. Along the southwest coast for Monday, winds will be northwesterly 10 to 15 knots, waves 3 feet within Bristol Bay, 2 feet within Kuskokwim Bay. Winds will turn easterly at St. Matthew, and waves as high as 10 feet. Southerly winds there in the Pribilofs with waves of 8 feet, but winds will be out of the west-northwest, right around 15 to 20 knots into lower Yukon Delta and into Norton Sound with waves of 3 to 4 feet. And for Tuesday, winds come back around to the southeast, 20 to 25 knots there at Bristol and Kuskokwim Bays, waves 4 to 5 feet. Variable winds 10 knots in around the Pribilofs, but on the backside of this system, the low 30-knot north winds with 10-foot waves at St. Matthew, and look for easterly flow off the lower Yukon Delta, 15 to 20 knots with waves 3 to 4 feet. And for areas south of the Bering Strait on Monday, winds will be west-northwest, generally 15 to as high as 25 knots there coming into Port Clarence. Waves 4 to 6 feet, and as we go up through the lower Chukchi Sea, kind of a mixed bag of winds with that weak low circulation here. Offshore, 10 knots off of Point Hope, but coming back in 25 knots around Shishmaref. And then east-northeast winds as high as 25 knots. Utqiagvik west of Wainwright with waves there 7 to 8 feet, but 5-foot waves back toward Prudhoe Bay and Kaktovik there along the Beaufort Sea. And for Tuesday, west winds, Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik, 10 to 20 knots, waves 3-4 feet. Look for offshore southeast winds, 5 to 10 knots, Utqiagvik to Wainwright with 3 to 4 foot waves, and then winds turning back to the north through the Bering Strait, around 15 knots, increasing to 25 knots on the north side of St. Lawrence in the vicinity of Gambell with waves 5 to 6 feet. So there's your marine forecast, and certainly whenever you do attempt to venture out, make sure you inform people of your sailing and boating plans.